Skype, live from Brussels, we have Dr. Jamie Shea, Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges. Dr. Shea, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Eleni.
It's nice to speak to you again. Firstly, let me allow to explain to our audience, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Emerging Security Challenges Division at Nato focuses on terrorism, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, cyber defense, and energy security.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Okay, so allow me then to commence our discussion by talking about Russia. It's true to say that the annexation of Crimea by Russia took us all by surprise, at least some of us. Recently it has been stated that the militarization of Crimea could be used to exert control over the whole Black Sea region. What does NATO intend to do about the Russian aggression?
Well, first of all, the Russian aggression doesn't only affect NATO, it affects the European Union because, of course, it was the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine which first led to this crisis. It affects the entire international community. So the first point I would like to make is the obvious one, but it has to be said that this is something where if we're going to be successful, we need all of the international organisations to pull together and send the same message. However, of course, it is a direct issue for NATO too. One of our very close partner countries is the victim of an aggression. Many of our other partners in the region, like Georgia, Moldova, are feeling uneasy as well, as you well know. And of course, in NATO, we are responding to the crisis in three particular ways. The first way is, of course, that we've frozen our practical cooperation with Russia until Russia rescinds the illegal annexation of Crimea and stops destabilizing Ukraine. So no more NATO-Russia exercises or practical things for the time being. Although we are keeping a diplomatic channel of communication with Russia open in the NATO-Russia Council. The second thing that we're doing is the Readiness Action Plan, which was one of the big decisions of our summit in Wales. In other words, we are making sure that we have the forces, the infrastructure, the command and control to rapidly put forces into Eastern Europe, Poland, the Baltic states, Romania, to deal with any attempt by Russia to challenge the sovereignty or the security of a NATO country. Russia has to know that an attack on one NATO country is automatically an attack on 28 NATO countries. There are two aspects of this, Eleni, very briefly. One is assurance. We, as you know, are sending troops to the Eastern allies on a regular basis for exercises, for training, to demonstrate our solidarity. The second aspect is adaptation, which will take place over a slightly longer time frame, where we are going to look at our bases, our command structure, pre-positioning of equipment, etc., on the territory of the new member states to ensure that we can defend them against any form of aggression or attack, whether it be conventional attack or whether it be the more sort of little green men, as we call them, the hybrid type of scenarios that we saw being practiced by Russia in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. Finally, the third element, and I touched upon it already, is we're giving a lot of support to Ukraine, to Georgia. A big defence package for Georgia was announced at the Wales summit.
It seems to me, though, that that every action has a reaction. So if we look at that, then I mean Russia seems to be reacting in the energy security sector. So even though there was a deal between Russia, Ukraine, and the EU just recently, Russian companies have in fact suspended coal exports a couple of days ago. So what is NATO's role in energy security, and you know how can this reliance on Russia in the energy sector be avoided?
Well, absolutely, very good questions. The first question of the first answer of a more general kind is that do not forget, yes, it's true that Europe depends a lot on Russia, Gazprom, Rosneft, etc., for its natural gas and oil supplies, but Russia depends massively on Europe the vast majority of Russia's fossil fuels are not exported to Asia, not exported to China, but are exported to Europe. For example, Russia sends 4 times, 5 times more gas to Europe than it does to China, even under the terms of the latest agreement between Russia and China. So Russia cannot afford to close the gas and the oil taps when it comes to the European markets. And that gives Europeans a certain negotiating power, that has to be said. Secondly, of course, the long-term conclusion is to diversify. Not just diversify pipelines, because they can still be used by the same supplier, Gazprom, but also diversify sources of supply. And I think if you look at Europe today, you've seen over the last few years a massive effort to make us more resilient against blackmail or disruptions to gas supplies. We have now far more liquefied natural gas terminals being built and being opened. A new one called Independence was opened in Lithuania just a couple of days ago. We are investing much more in renewables, for instance. We have the great advantage of coal coming in from the United States and of course down the road American shale gas and diversifying to countries like Algeria, Nigeria, Norway. So basically we can significantly reduce our dependency on simply one supplier, Russia. Now when it comes to Ukraine, I think everybody welcomes the agreement between Russia and Ukraine by the European Union to resume Russian gas supplies to Ukraine and negotiate a more reasonable price, which should see Ukraine come through the winter. But the European Union has done a great deal also to help Ukraine by what we call reverse transit. In other words, there's a pipeline, for example, from Slovakia, where the gas can go in the other direction from Slovakia to Ukraine. Germany is able to do that, Poland is able to do that as well, and that is also going to help Ukraine to get through the winter. But also Ukraine, of course, with the new government now, has to reform its energy sector. It's been far too wasteful in terms of energy. Subsidies have been very high, and it has to use its energy in a far more cost-effective way. But I'm optimistic that in terms of security and supply, we can survive this winter well without fearing major disruptions. As far as NATO's role is concerned, of course, we're not the European Union. We don't negotiate gas contracts. We're not private companies making decisions on power plants, on pipelines, but we do 2 things. The first thing is we, of course, consult politically very frequently on the strategic trends in energy, because, of course, as you rightly say, at a certain level, energy is geopolitics, and geopolitics is energy. And we regularly have briefings by the EU Commission, by the International Energy Agency in Paris, by the private sector, so we are aware of the trends. The second thing is that we do work on critical infrastructure protection. We do a lot of work, particularly with the private sector, with other international organisations, to assess our vulnerabilities. Where could things go wrong? Where are our weak spots? How resilient is our critical infrastructure? Not just to natural disasters, but also to man-made disruptions. For example, cyber attacks against industrial control systems on energy pipelines. So we do a good deal of work there. But again, NATO's major role is not energy security. Of course, that's best handled by other more competent institutions. But given the link between energy and politics and stability, we keep a close eye on that particular dossier.
You spoke about diversification and geopolitics. Now, funnily enough, Joe Biden, when he visited Turkey last week, also spoke about the diversification of energy in the energy sector. And this brings me to talk about something closer to home. In fact, when NATO Secretary General, the NATO Secretary General visited Athens recently, and he was asked about Turkey's recent violations of Cyprus's economic exclusive zone, he stated that there were more important challenges in the area. However, considering that Cyprus is illegally occupied by a NATO ally, and it's surrounded by a vast wealth of natural gas reserves in the area. Couldn't we conclude then that there are security implications stemming from Turkey's stance in the Mediterranean recently?
Well, on this, I have to say quite frankly, but also honestly, that this is not a subject which has been on NATO's agenda, as I think the Secretary-General clearly implied in the answer that he gave during his recent visit to Athens. So I cannot, again, in all frankness and honesty, give you a NATO position on this particular issue. What I can say more generally is, of course, the discoveries in the Eastern Mediterranean, particularly off the coast of Israel, initially the exploitation of the Leviathan and the Tamar gas fields is a potential bonus, of course, not just for Europe's energy diversification and supply, but also for the Middle East, because Israel, for example, is planning to supply Jordan, is planning also to supply Egypt, and therefore these fuel supplies can be an important part of development, prosperity, international cooperation in the Middle East as well. It's not just, of course, for Europe, but I've also noted, obviously, the exploration that's currently taking place off the coast of Cyprus. And all I can hope is that this type of these discoveries, which are in the territorial waters of a number of different states, will be an incentive not for confrontation, please no, but for cooperation, for working together, because only in that way will there be the stability which will encourage international energy companies to invest, to drill, to put the infrastructure in place. So I would hope, as I say, that as these discoveries are exploited, this will be an opportunity for cooperation. But that's all I have to say on that particular subject.
That's great, thank you. But energy, of course, is not the only recent security threat. The emergence of the Islamic State is also one that threatens stability in the region, and particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean region. What is NATO's role in defeating ISIS?
Well, first of all, ISIS, or as we call it here, ISIL, because that's the particular designation that we follow here at NATO, is one of the most significant threats to emerge in recent years. This is not just a terrorist organization. It's organised criminal network exploiting illegally oil, holding people to ransom, selling off art treasures and precious metals and so on. And it's also more and more looking like a conventional army. The latest estimates is that it has about 32,000 recruits, and about 10,000 of those come from outside the Middle East, many from Central Asia, some of course from Europe. We have to face up to that as well, and indeed from over 80 countries. So what are we doing? Well, clearly NATO is not in the lead, because the international coalition that has been put together by the United States, involving over 60 countries, is clearly in the lead. So the coalition is in the lead. NATO has made it clear at the Wales summit that we are prepared to assist if we are asked, if there is added value, if there is something that we can usefully do, for example, coordinating air assets or coordinating satellite intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets. But we need to add value, as I said, and be asked. There are, however, some aspects that I could usefully address quickly. The first one is that we had the Iraqi National Security Advisor here visiting NATO, and he did suggest that the Iraqis are looking actively at the assistance that NATO could provide Iraq with the training, with the development of its armed forces, because the most critical element of defeating ISIL is not a foreign intervention. It's the ability of the locals, whether in Syria, in terms of the Syrian moderates, in the Syrian Free Army, or in Iraq, of course, the Iraqi army. It's their ability, because it's their fight, first and foremost, to take on ISIL. We have to help them in that, but it's them against them, as Thomas Friedman, the journalist, put it, and not us against them. In the way that this could have been perceived in the past. So we stand ready to see what we can do to assist the Iraqis. in the next weeks and months. The second aspect is the foreign fighters, because all of us here at NATO, my colleagues over at the European Union, are potentially worried about what will happen when the 3,000 or so citizens from EU countries who have gone off to fight in Syria for ISIL, and not just ISIL, al-Nusra, some of the other jihadist organisations, when they come back, will they come back radicalised? Will they come back intending to carry out attacks on EU countries, or the United States or Canada or elsewhere? Will they act as lone individuals, or will they organise themselves into groups, terrorist cells, once they return to Europe? And as you know, this is an issue which is not so much for NATO, because it deals with, affects the police, the intelligence services, immigration, customs, but where there is a very active debate in all of our countries concerning how to monitor these individuals, whether they should be, their passports should be taken away from them, whether they indeed could be put on trial because they've been in terrorist camps and so on. But this is an aspect that all of us are, of course, very preoccupied about indeed.
You say that, just let me take you back to the Middle East just for a while. You say that it's a problem that the locals need to solve, but now there is a situation in Syria that has been going on for 4 years, and doesn't seem that anybody wants to do anything about it.
Well, I can understand exactly what you're saying, because the situation, of course, inside Syria is appalling. 13.6 million displaced people and refugees from the fighting that was unleashed by Assad, and that will obviously leave a very lasting legacy. I fully understand that. But the point that you asked me was about ISIL, and the reason why ISIL is a preoccupation is because it's trying to operate in a number of different places simultaneously: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. It claims now to be establishing mini caliphates in Libya and in other parts of North Africa. So it has, if not universalist, at least pretensions to be a force for the chaos and destabilization well beyond the particular Syrian areas where it first emerged. And I think it's for that reason that it's one of the priority occupations. But that is not said with any attempt to imply that what President Assad has done in Syria is not totally reprehensible. But NATO's position, as I said before, is that we are not directly involved in the particular crises and conflict of that region, except for the very key job of protecting our ally Turkey. As you know, Eleni, very well, for the last 2 years we've stationed Patriot air defense missiles along the Turkish border with Syria. This is a commitment that we are going to continue into 2015 in order, of course, to make it clear that we have, if you like, a readiness action plan, not just for Eastern Europe, but to defend our ally Turkey in the south as well. Okay,
so if the Islamic State in any way threatens Turkey from the Syrian border, then NATO will intervene. But does this also apply in the case of Libya, due to the fact that there are a lot of immigrants coming from Syria and Libya, that the Islamic State is in fact a threat?
The European Union, interior ministries, the police, the intelligence services, they have a bigger role to play when it comes to de-radicalisation, when it comes to combating also, very importantly, the jihadist narrative, because of course ISIL, as you know very well, exploits the social media for propaganda, for recruitment purposes, to glorify their cause, and deconstructing that narrative and showing the reality behind it, which is a reality of medieval bestiality and cruelty, deconstructing that narrative is part and parcel. So NATO has to occupy, as I said earlier, the niche areas where we can add value. But knowing that, again, we are not necessarily going to be in the lead here. Now, you mentioned the migration issue. Yes, that's extremely important. But again, NATO is not a refugee agency. We're not an immigration agency. The European Union with Frontex, with the border monitoring and integration system Frontex, with things like Mare Nostrum, the Italian naval-led operation to deal with boat people, illegal immigrants in the Mediterranean, the latest Triton operation. All of these things are very important, of course, in combining the efforts of our navies and our police, our coast guards, in order to not only deal with these people in a humane, humanitarian way, but of course also to try to control this. This is going to be, of course, an important issue, and certainly the military, particularly in the south. I mentioned the navies have a role to play, but again, borders, immigration is an EU area, it's not a NATO area. Finally, Libya. Yes, we have proposed some time ago to the Libyans a sort of, if you like, a defence capacity building initiative. The EU has done the same, so has the United Nations, in areas like the standing up of a national guard, the training of the police, for the EU border guards, and so on. But unfortunately, it has to be said, the very chaotic conditions in Libya at the moment do not make it possible for any of our organisations, whether it's NATO, the UN, or the EU, in terms of security, in terms of force protection, to launch those initiatives for the time being. But I hope that there will be sufficient stability in the future in Libya that we can go ahead with those programs.
You mentioned at some point that about ISIS and social media. Of course, ISIS recruits a lot of its radicals through the internet, and of course they use the internet for propaganda. I'm just wondering if there have been any cyber attacks.
A very good question. It's, of course, not always easy to know who is behind a cyber attack. The perpetrators do not leave signatures. He who claims the attack is not necessarily the person who is carrying it out. And, of course, if an attack does happen, then, of course, to be able to limit the damage and to recover as quickly as possible. And that's the emphasis of NATO's current cyber defence, to protect our own networks. Now, at the same time, you're obviously right. I mean, cyber is potentially an area which terrorists may want to exploit in the future, because it's an easy way to cause a lot of disruption. Obviously, if you can interfere with somebody's voting system, or the banking system, or the air traffic system, or whatever. But at the same time, you also have to ask a few questions. I mean, the first thing is that classically terrorists want physical destruction. They want the blood of innocent civilians. That's how they shock. That's how they propagandize. So they chop people's heads off, because frankly that shocks more than a cyber attack, which can cause some disruption, but doesn't cause the loss of life. I mean, in the future, we have to be careful. Cyber attacks could reach a threshold where indeed they could be far more destructive and cause loss of life. And by the way, that's one of the reasons, if I could point out, why in NATO's new cyber defence policy, we say for the first time that cyber attacks could reach a threshold at which they could be considered by NATO as an Article 5 attack and aggression, launching a collective defence. So we don't rule that out. But as I've said, the evidence so far is that the terrorists want blood more than they want electrons. So that's not to say that won't change in the future. We have to be very much on our guard. The second point I would like to make is, as you said, Eleni, the terrorists use the social media, the networks, for propaganda purposes, to get their message across, to recruit. And of course, if the networks are not working because of cyber attacks going on, they use their best weapon, if I can use that term, to recruit, to propagandize, to raise money. So, if they are so dependent on the internet, then maybe they are not so keen to disrupt the internet. Let's see, that's one thing. I don't suppose for 1 minute that there are easy answers to this question, but again, our main concern is to counter the jihadist narrative with an effective counter-narrative which makes it clear that these are not romantic warriors, they're criminals, they're not speaking in the name of a religion, they're distorting that religion, they provide no answers at all to any of the most burning issues of our time, and increasingly to turn people away from them. That is, at the end of the day, the best way of destroying ISIL.
Now, taking all these things into account, and as well as what is happening in Afghanistan right now, because NATO troops were going to leave Afghanistan, I'm wondering, and I guess a lot of people are wondering, what the future holds for NATO. And actually, if you could just tell us a little bit about the Afghanistan situation.
Yes, well, the first thing is that NATO is not leaving Afghanistan. You're absolutely right in the sense that the ISAF mission, the International Security Assistance Force, the mission that we've had in Afghanistan for the past 11 years, that is ending on the 31st of December. That was a combat mission as well as a stabilization mission, and that comes to an end, absolutely. And many of our troops have been coming home, as you know, over the last year as that mission gradually winds down. But on the 1st of January, a new mission called Resolute Support will begin. It's going to involve about 12,500 NATO soldiers, about 9,000 of them are coming from the United States, but it will not be a combat mission. It will be a training, assistance, advisory mission to help the Afghan forces to keep security by themselves. The Afghan forces, of course, have developed well over the last couple of years. They've taken over the lead responsibility province by province. They are now responsible, even today, for 90% of all of the operations going on. They've had their problems, obviously, as a young force, in terms of recruitment, in terms of being able to hold their positions, but they've also done remarkably well. But we can't abandon them. Naturally, we need to continue to support them, and we will do so for at least initially the next 2 years. On the other side, we want to stay engaged with Afghanistan in the long run by developing a NATO-Afghan partnership program, and we need to fill that with more substance. We are staying engaged with them to make sure that the Afghan National Army is able to promote the kind of security which is going to be needed. But of course the Afghans must keep their responsibility too. They have to be a good partner to us. They have to get on with reforms because we all know you don't defeat an insurgency with military force alone. We know that. The historical record is clear. You need military force to contain the issue, but ultimately it's reform, it's making your society attractive, it's giving job opportunities to young people, it's integrating the various groups into political power sharing. That's how you make insurgencies go away. So we will do our bit, but the new Afghan government, which has made a very promising beginning, has to do its bit as well by getting on with the necessary reforms.
Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you again and maybe see you one of these days.
Maybe see you. Yes, that's right. Thank you.